Pack your things, Nelson. You're done here, my boss William Hartman said coldly, not even looking up from his desk. I stood frozen in his office doorway, still holding the coffee I'd brought him every morning for 12 years. The Riverside Mall project? That was my idea all along. You were just following my vision. My hands started shaking. Riverside Mall was my baby, my design, my late nights, my breakthrough idea that would make Hartman Construction the biggest firm in the state. I'd spent 3 years perfecting every detail. Now he was taking credit and throwing me away like garbage. Clean out your desk in 20 minutes, he continued. Security will escort you out. I set the coffee down carefully on his desk. William, you know that's not true. He finally looked at me, eyes cold as winter. Prove it, Nelson. Oh wait. You can't. But he was wrong about that. Very wrong. I walked back to my desk in complete silence. The office buzzed around me like nothing had happened. Architects bent over drafting tables, phones rang, printers hummed. My coworkers didn't even know their senior project manager had just been destroyed. I'd been William's right hand since 2012, when Hartman Construction was just him and his father operating out of a garage. I helped build this company from 10 employees to over 200. Every major project we'd landed in the past 5 years had my fingerprints on it. But Riverside Mall was different. It wasn't just another shopping center, it was revolutionary. Mixed-use spaces, eco-friendly materials, community integration. The client loved my presentation so much they'd signed a $50 million contract on the spot. Now William was telling everyone it was his brilliant vision. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a small metal key. Some things were too important to keep in the office. Security showed up exactly 20 minutes later. 2 guards I'd known for years, looking embarrassed. Sorry, Nelson, the older one whispered. Orders are orders. I nodded, carrying my small box of personal items. Everyone watched as I walked through the office for the last time. Some people looked confused. Others looked away. A few younger architects I'd mentored seemed genuinely upset. But nobody said anything. That's how William controlled people, fear and money. I'd watched him fire good people before for asking too many questions. Now I was just another casualty. At the elevator, I turned back one last time. Through his office windows, I could see William on the phone, probably bragging about the Riverside project to another client. He caught my eye and smiled. That smile told me everything I needed to know. He thought he'd won. He thought Nelson Bennett, the quiet guy who never caused trouble, would just disappear. He had no idea what was coming. Driving home, I thought about how this all started. 12 years ago, I was fresh out of college with an architecture degree and big dreams. My dad had worked construction his whole life, and I wanted to design the buildings instead of just putting them up. William hired me as a junior draftsman when bigger firms wouldn't even interview me. Back then, he seemed like a decent guy. His father, old Pete Hartman, still ran the company with honesty and hard work. We did small residential projects, some small commercial buildings. Nothing fancy, but we did it right. William was different then. He actually cared about the work, about quality. We'd stay late together, talking about someday landing a big project that would put us on the map. I trusted him. More than that, I respected him. When old Pete died 5 years ago, William inherited everything. That's when things changed. He became obsessed with being seen as successful, as important. The work stopped mattering. Only the image mattered. At home, I sat in my garage workshop staring at a metal filing cabinet I'd installed 3 years ago. My wife Kate was at her sister's house for the week, which was probably good. She didn't need to see me like this angry, betrayed, planning something that might get me in trouble. The filing cabinet was my insurance policy. For years, I'd made copies of everything. Every design, every email, every meeting note. Not because I didn't trust William, but because I was careful. My dad always said, trust, but document everything. I'd kept meticulous records of every project I'd worked on, including Riverside Mall. I pulled out a thick folder labeled RM Original Concepts. Inside were my first sketches from 3 years ago, my handwritten notes, my research on sustainable building materials. Everything was dated and signed. More importantly, everything was notarized by my neighbor who happened to be a lawyer. I'd been thorough because Riverside was special. I knew it could make or break careers. The Riverside Mall project started with a phone call in September 2021. The city was looking for a firm to design a new shopping complex that would revitalize the downtown area. They wanted something innovative, something that would bring young families back to the city center. William was in meetings all day, so I took the call. The project manager, Kendra Lopez, explained their vision. They didn't just want another strip mall. They wanted community gathering spaces, green areas, residential units above the shops. It was exactly the kind of project I'd been dreaming about. That night, I couldn't sleep. I filled 3 notebooks with ideas. Mixed-use development with vertical gardens. Solar panels disguised as decorative elements. A central plaza where the community could hold farmers' markets and concerts. By morning, I had the basic concept that would eventually become our winning design. When I showed William my sketches, his eyes lit up. "This is it, Nelson," he said. "This is our ticket to the big leagues." For the next 6 months, I lived and breathed Riverside Mall. I researched every aspect of sustainable construction. I contacted suppliers across 3 states to find the right materials. I worked with environmental consultants to maximize energy efficiency. Kate joked that I was having an affair with the project. In a way, she was right. This wasn't just a building to me. It was proof that I belonged in the big leagues. William supported me completely at first. He gave me a team of junior architects and told them to follow my lead. He approved my budget requests without question. When I needed to visit similar projects in other cities for research, he paid for the trips. "Whatever you need," he'd say. "This project will define our company's future." By March 2022, we had a complete design package. The presentation was scheduled for April 15th. The night before, William pulled me aside. "Nelson, you've done incredible work. After we win this contract, we need to talk about making you a partner." I went home that night feeling like I'd finally made it. The presentation was a disaster, but not in the way I expected. Everything went perfectly. The city council loved our design. Kendra Lopez called it visionary. The environmental groups praised our sustainability features. Local business owners were excited about the community spaces. We won the contract unanimously. The problem came afterward, at the celebration dinner. William stood up to make a toast. "I want to thank my team for bringing my vision to life," he said. "When I first conceived the Riverside project, I knew it would require innovative thinking." He went on for 10 minutes about his ideas, his research, his breakthrough concepts. He mentioned me once as part of the talented team that executed my plans. I sat there, stunned. Around the table, my team members looked uncomfortable. They knew whose ideas we'd been working on for 6 months. But nobody said anything. After dinner, I pulled William aside. "That was my design," I said quietly. He looked confused, like I was speaking another language. "Nelson, we're a team. We don't worry about individual credit here." Over the next few months, things got worse. In every client meeting, every interview with the press, William presented himself as the mastermind behind Riverside Mall. He'd memorized all my research, adopted my terminology, even copied my hand gestures when explaining the design concepts. The local newspaper ran a feature story calling him, the visionary architect transforming our city. My name wasn't mentioned. My team started treating me differently. Not disrespectfully, but carefully. They realized the politics had shifted. William was the star now, and I was just another employee. When the architectural awards season started, William submitted the project under his name only. The State Architecture Board gave him their Innovation Award. He hung it in the lobby where everyone could see it. But I wasn't done fighting yet. I started documenting everything more carefully. Every time William took credit for my work in a meeting, I wrote it down. Every email where he presented my ideas as his own, I saved copies. I told myself I was just being careful. Really, I was preparing for war. The breaking point came 6 months ago during a meeting with potential new clients. They'd seen the Riverside Mall coverage and wanted something similar for their project. William was in full performance mode, describing his innovative approach to sustainable design. Then one of the clients asked a technical question about thermal bridging in our green roof system. William froze. I designed that system myself, spent weeks researching the engineering requirements. Without thinking, I started to answer. Actually, the key is integrating the structural membrane with. Thank you, Nelson, William interrupted sharply. I'll handle this. But he couldn't. He fumbled through a generic explanation that made no sense. The clients looked confused. After they left, William was furious. Don't ever undermine me in a meeting again, he said. That night, I made a decision. I went to my garage workshop and started organizing my files. If William wanted to play dirty, I could play dirty too. But I needed to be smart about it. I spent the next few weeks building my case like a lawyer preparing for trial. I had originals of my first sketches, dated and notarized. I had emails from the early days where William praised Nelson's brilliant ideas. I had meeting notes where team members discussed implementing Nelson's concepts. Most importantly, I had a folder labeled Personal Projects that contained all my preliminary research and design work done on my own time, before William even knew about the Riverside opportunity. Any copyright lawyer would recognize this as proof of original creation. But I needed more than legal proof. I needed public proof. I started reaching out to people who'd witnessed the real development process. My team members, vendors who'd worked with me directly, even Kendra Lopez from the city planning department. I wasn't ready to make accusations yet, but I wanted to know what people remembered. The answers were encouraging. Everyone remembered me as the lead designer. They just assumed William was taking credit because he owned the company. That's how it works, one of my team members said. The boss gets the glory. Maybe so, but not this time. 3 months ago, William made his biggest mistake. We were pitching another major project, and he decided to present without me in the room. He'd done this before, but this client was different. They were architects themselves, recently retired, investing in their dream project. When William started describing his design philosophy, using all the concepts I'd developed for Riverside, they started asking detailed questions. Hard questions about structural engineering, environmental systems, material specifications. William tried to bullshit his way through it, but these people knew their stuff. The meeting was a disaster. We lost the contract to another firm. When word got back to our other clients, 3 more projects were put under review. That's when William started blaming me. In his version of events, I was the problem. My negative attitude was affecting team morale. My lack of leadership was costing us clients. He started excluding me from important meetings, assigning my projects to other people. Last month, he hired his nephew Brandon straight out of college and put him in charge of our newest project. Brandon was a nice kid, but he couldn't design a doghouse. It was obvious William was pushing me out. 2 weeks ago, everything crystallized. William called a company meeting to announce that we'd been selected for another major project, a mixed-use development even bigger than Riverside Mall. "This validates our innovative approach," he said, looking directly at me. "It proves that visionary leadership makes the difference." After the meeting, I went to Kendra Lopez. As the city planning coordinator, she'd worked with us on Riverside and had been impressed enough to recommend us for the new project. "Kendra," I said, "I need to ask you something confidentially. In all your interactions with our firm, who did you work with directly on the design concepts?" She looked surprised. "You, of course. William handled the business side, but you were the creative force. Everyone knows that." That conversation changed everything. I realized that the truth was already out there. People knew who'd really designed Riverside Mall. They just weren't saying anything because they assumed it didn't matter. William owned the company, so William got the credit. But what if it did matter? What if people knew the real story? I spent the weekend putting together what I called Project Truth. Not a revenge plan exactly, but a systematic way to set the record straight. First, I made copies of everything, all my documentation, all my evidence. I stored copies in 3 different places, including a safe deposit box. Then I started making a list of everyone who needed to know the truth. The architectural press, our major clients, the awards committees who'd honored William for my work. But I needed to be smart about this. If I just started making accusations, William could spin it as a disgruntled employee making trouble. I needed the story to tell itself. Monday morning, I came to work with a different attitude. Instead of being angry, I was calm. Focused. William noticed the change immediately. "You seem better today, Nelson," he said. "More like your old self." I smiled. "Just accepting how things are," I replied. He relaxed, thinking he'd broken my spirit. He had no idea I was just getting started. That afternoon, I submitted my first article to Architectural Review magazine, a detailed case study of innovative sustainable design, using Riverside Mall as the primary example. The article was published 3 weeks later under the headline, "Innovation from the Ground Up: How One Designer's Vision Transformed Urban Development." I'd written it carefully, focusing on the technical aspects of the design rather than taking credit directly. But anyone reading it would understand who'd really created the Riverside concept. I included detailed drawings from my original sketches, explained my research process, quoted from my early notes. William was furious when he saw it. "You made me look like some kind of front man," he said. "I never claimed to be the sole designer," I replied calmly. "The article talks about team collaboration. But your name is all over it." "Because I wrote it. And because those are my original drawings." He couldn't argue with that. The drawings were clearly marked with my signature and date. More importantly, the article got attention. Other architects started reaching out, asking about my design process. A university invited me to give a guest lecture. Suddenly, people in the industry knew my name. William watched his carefully constructed image start to crumble, and he panicked. That's when William made his final mistake, the one that led to my firing this morning. He decided to shut me up permanently. Last week, he started spreading rumors that I was difficult to work with and taking too much credit. He told people I was having personal problems, that I couldn't handle not being the center of attention. Then he made his move with the new project. In front of the entire staff, he announced that he'd be personally leading the design team for the mixed-use development. "Some projects are too important to delegate," he said, looking directly at me. "This requires experienced leadership." He assigned me to work on small residential projects, the kind of work I'd been doing 12 years ago when I started. It was a clear demotion, designed to humiliate me into quitting. But I didn't quit. I kept showing up, doing my work, documenting everything. That's when he decided to fire me for insubordination and claim credit for Riverside Mall completely. In his version of events, I was just a junior employee who'd gotten too big for my britches. But he'd forgotten something important. After security escorted me out, I drove straight to my lawyer's office. Not just any lawyer, Kate's brother Paul, who specialized in intellectual property law. I'd been avoiding this conversation for months, but now I had no choice. "Nelson," Paul said after I explained the situation, "this is actually pretty straightforward. You have documented proof of original creation. The copyright on those designs belongs to you, not to Hartman Construction." "But I was their employee," I said. "Doesn't that make it work for hire?" "Only if your employment contract specifically assigns design copyrights to the company. Do you remember signing anything like that?" I thought back to my hiring 12 years ago. Old Pete Hartman had been a handshake and trust kind of man. My employment contract was 1 page long, covering salary and basic responsibilities. Nothing about intellectual property. Plus, Paul continued, you did most of your initial research and concept development on your own time, before the project was officially assigned. That's clearly your personal intellectual property. We spent the next hour going through my files. Paul was impressed by my documentation. "This is better evidence than most professional copyright cases," he said. The next morning, Paul filed a copyright infringement lawsuit against Hartman Construction and William personally. But that was just the beginning. I'd spent months building relationships with people in the industry, and now it was time to use them. I started with Kendra Lopez at City Planning. "Kendra, I need to tell you something about the Riverside Mall project," I said when I called her. "I'm no longer with Hartman Construction, and there are some things you should know." I explained everything: how I developed the original concept, how William had taken credit, how I'd been fired when I tried to set the record straight. She was quiet for a long time. Finally, she said, "Nelson, this explains a lot. William's been struggling with the technical aspects of the ongoing construction. He keeps referring questions to other people. Would you be willing to make a statement about who you actually worked with during the design phase?" I asked. "Absolutely. What William did isn't just wrong, it's fraud." That was the first domino. By the end of the day, I had similar commitments from 3 major clients and 2 city council members. Word of the lawsuit spread through the local architecture community like wildfire. Within a week, I started getting calls from reporters. The story had everything they loved: corporate betrayal, stolen credit, David versus Goliath. The first article appeared in the business section of our local newspaper: "Local Architect Claims Boss Stole Award-Winning Design." It included quotes from Kendra Lopez and excerpts from my original sketch. Tyrrell Press picked it up. By Friday, it was trending on social media. #credit where credit's deserved became a rallying cry for architects and other creative professionals who'd experienced similar treatment. William tried to control the narrative, but he was fighting with a water gun against a fire hose. Every time he gave an interview claiming the designs were his, I released more documentation proving otherwise. Photos of my original sketches. Emails where he'd praised my work. Meeting notes where other employees discussed Nelson's concepts. The evidence was overwhelming, and the court of public opinion was turning against him fast. The architectural awards committees were the next to act. The State Architecture Board announced they were reviewing Williams' Innovation Award. The National Sustainable Design Council opened an investigation into whether their Environmental Achievement Award had been given under false pretenses. Both organizations requested copies of my documentation. They were particularly interested in the timeline, proof that my concepts had been developed before William claimed to have conceived them. Meanwhile, Hartman Construction was hemorrhaging business. 3 major clients canceled contracts, citing concerns about design authenticity. 2 more put their projects on hold pending the outcome of my lawsuit. William's reputation in the industry was collapsing. But the real damage was just beginning. Paul had discovered something interesting while researching the case. Riverside Mall wasn't the only project where William had taken credit for other people's work. Going back through company records, we found a pattern of design theft going back 3 years. William had been stealing ideas from his employees and presenting them as his own innovations. That's when I made a decision that surprised even me. Instead of just fighting for credit on Riverside Mall, I decided to expose the entire pattern of theft. I reached out to former employees who'd left the company under suspicious circumstances. The stories were remarkably similar. Talented designers would join the company, develop innovative concepts, then find themselves marginalized as William took credit for their work. Most had left quietly, afraid that speaking up would hurt their careers. But now, with my case getting national attention, they were ready to talk. We formed what the press started calling the Hartman 7, 7 former employees with documented cases of design theft. Paul filed an expanded lawsuit representing all of us. The new complaint was devastating. It accused William of running a systematic scheme to steal intellectual property from his employees. The evidence filled 200 pages. Financial documents showed that William had built his company's reputation and wealth on stolen designs. His personal net worth had grown from $500,000 to over $5 million in 5 years, directly correlating with the projects he'd stolen. The story exploded into national news when Architecture Today published an investigative piece titled, "The Design Thief: How One Boss Built an Empire on Stolen Ideas." The article featured interviews with all 7 victims, detailed analysis of the stolen designs, and financial documents showing how William had profited from his fraud. The response was immediate and devastating. The American Institute of Architects expelled William from their organization. The state licensing board opened an investigation that could result in him losing his architectural license permanently. But the most satisfying moment came when the Riverside Mall project was officially reassigned. The city council held an emergency meeting and voted unanimously to terminate Hartman Construction's contract. Kendra Lopez announced that they would be working directly with me to complete the project under my own newly formed company. "We want to work with the actual designer," she said at the press conference. "The person who created the vision we fell in love with." William's empire wasn't just crumbling, it was being systematically dismantled by the people he'd betrayed. 6 months after William fired me, I stood in the conference room of my new architecture firm, looking out at the Riverside Mall construction site. My company, Bennett Design Group, now had 15 employees, including 6 of the talented people who'd left Hartman Construction over the years. We'd won 4 major contracts in our first 6 months, including 2 projects that clients had pulled from William's company. The phone rang constantly with new opportunities. Architects across the country were reaching out, wanting to work with the firm that had stood up to design theft. William's company was finished. He'd filed for bankruptcy last month after losing his last major client. His personal assets were frozen pending the outcome of our civil suit, which Paul expected to settle for several $1,000,000. The building that had housed Hartman Construction for 20 years was now empty, with a "for lease" sign in the window. But the best news had come yesterday. The State Architecture Board had officially transferred the Innovation Award from William to me. They also created a new policy requiring thorough documentation of design ownership for all future awards. I thought about William often during those first months of success. Not with anger anymore, but with something closer to pity. He'd had everything a successful company, talented employees who respected him, a legacy he could have been proud of. He'd thrown it all away because he couldn't stand sharing credit with the people who made his success possible. Last week, I heard he'd moved to another state, trying to start over with a different name. I doubted he'd learned anything from the experience. People like William rarely did. They always believed their own lies, convinced themselves they deserved credit for other people's work. But the industry had learned. The Hartman case was now taught in business schools as an example of how toxic leadership destroys companies. Architecture firms across the country had revised their employment contracts to clearly protect employee intellectual property. Kate was proud of what I'd accomplished, but she was more proud of how I'd handled it. "You could have been bitter," she said one evening as we walked through downtown, past the construction site where Riverside Mall was taking shape. "Instead, you turned it into something positive." Standing in my office today, looking at the Innovation Award on my wall, I thought about the lesson I'd learned from this whole experience. For 12 years, I'd been the quiet guy who never caused trouble. I'd let William take credit for my work because I believed that doing good work was enough. I'd trusted that talent and dedication would eventually be recognized. But sometimes, you have to fight for what's yours. Sometimes, staying quiet isn't noble, it's just enabling the people who would steal from you. The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was another potential client, a developer who'd heard about our work on Riverside Mall. "Mr. Bennett," the voice said, "we have a project we think would be perfect for your innovative approach. We want to work with the real architect, not some wannabe taking credit for other people's ideas." I smiled, looking out at the city skyline where several buildings now bore my architectural signature. "I'd be happy to discuss it," I said. "When can you come in?" Because that's what I was now, not William's employee, not the quiet guy in the corner, but Nelson Bennett, architect. The man whose name was on the door, whose designs were changing the skyline, whose story had inspired other creative professionals to stand up for themselves. William had tried to erase me from my own success story. Instead, he'd just made that story more powerful than ever.